The following podcast is scheduled for a 30-minute time limit. Introducing your host, first broadcasting out of North Bay, Ontario, Canada, Adam, the Floater Costa, and his podcast partner, Matthew Stinger.
Welcome to the Wrasslun Show. I'm at Adam Conta. That's at Matthew Sucre. Matt, I can't believe it. The day crept up on me and I didn't even know it. This past Tuesday, we hit 1 year. On August 8th, 2016, we launched the Wrasslun Show, episode 1, in which I actually went back and listened to it. We talked.
Did you?
We did, yes. No entrance music. No weird announcer introducing us. We just started cold, and we talked about Matt Hardy's interview on Talk is Jericho. We talked about another podcast on the first episode of our podcast. And then we talked about a couple of other things, some promos from Raw, what we thought was happening with SummerSlam, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't believe it's been a year.
Yeah.
Thanks for sticking with me and not abandoning me.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to be a part of this, and it's really been awesome to see this grow from just us kind of goofing around at first, and then all of a sudden it was like, okay, we've got a little something here, and to have Jeff and Drew Squared on board.
Drew Squared, I like that.
Yeah, to have
D2.
those guys. And it's what's really neat is, me, you, and Drew Ferris actually come from a media broadcasting radio background, and I know Jeff did go to school for radio broadcasting, for Andrew Kent, he's just a wrestling fan, doesn't have any kind of broadcasting background, and even for Jeff to come up with the idea of why don't I do this in my car, and just the guys that They come on board. They liked what we had. We were all friends before it started, but I mean, for them to be like, "Hey, I think I can add something to your network," and it's been really, really cool to see.
And hopefully, no, you know what? Scratch that. In fact, we're just getting started, and I'm sure we will continue to grow. And as long as you want us to keep growing, we will keep growing. And one of the ways that we've done that, I mean, look at everything that we've done in a year. We got on iTunes and multiple platforms.
That's right.
We have our own social media, which you can follow at The Wrasslun Show or on Facebook.com/The Wrasslun Show. But, I mean, we've got our own YouTube channel now, which we just launched this week, which we're very excited about.
Awesome, and thank you for everyone for tuning in and watching those videos. And let us know, start the conversation, let us know what you think about those videos, either specifically or as a whole. We want to know. And,
hopefully that market will continue to grow with us as well. Basically, we're just going to get some of this drivel out of the way here and say thank you. Obviously, without you, we couldn't do this show. I mean, we could, but no one would listen.
But
and then what would be the point?
It would be pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for listening, and we ask that you continue to spread the love. Let people know about our podcasts, our videos, and all the other media, because, I mean, we want to keep bringing you more. And the more successful that we are, the more we can bring to you. So thank you for letting my dopey little podcast mean something to more than just me.
And like I said, I think I remember saying it on the first podcast was you and I would walk up and down the halls of this building we're in now and just chat about wrestling anyway.
Yeah.
And I remember saying it'd be cool if we did this, but at the time we did not have the time.
No, we did.
And it just kind of worked out.
Heck, we still don't have the time.
We don't really have the time, but it's just funny how it kind of worked out that it was like, all right, let's take our lunchroom conversations and record them. And that's what it's kind of turned into.
My inspiration for starting this, Kevin Smith, once said that podcasts, you should just do them because anybody can, and it's a great way to record a history of you and your friends. And I feel like that's at its core what the network is all about. A bunch of us as friends getting together, chatting about wrestling. And now, who would have guessed a year from now, me and Andrew would go to a WWE house show together with my dad.
No kidding.
By the way, I have to ask if you popped for Luke Harper's double biceps. He is not done giving the double biceps.
He's still doing that?
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's so funny. If you don't know what we're talking about, go somewhere and watch Luke Harper in a house show match, because I don't think he's done it on actual SmackDown.
I haven't seen him do it on TV, but rumor has it
he likes
he'll be
to
teaming up with Sin Cara in the future, and if that's the case,
Luke Harper and the Little Fish.
Luke Harper forever.
Yeah, he does the bite. He likes to show off his biceps at house shows and dark matches.
It was definitely the highlight for me, for sure.
That's right.
Picking a highlight from the last year, I think, would be impossible. I think we'll try to do that in our video content for this week as well. So stay tuned for that. We're going to talk about that. But first, we're going to talk about an age-old question. Matt, does funny equal money? Because recently, Mick Foley took a little bit of heat from the wrestling community, particularly the old school community, even more particularly Jim Cornette, who said that Foley needed to be ashamed of himself for participating in an angle with Joey Ryan over at a wrestling show in Dublin. So what happened, and why is he being chastised? Well, we have to kind of tread around this delicately since we are a family show. Joey Ryan has a gimmick in which a certain part of his anatomy is considered large and powerful. And if you wanted further clarification, I would say that the gentleman in Degeneration X would point to it quite often. And at times, professional wrestlers have attempted to defeat Joey by grabbing that particular part of his body.
A lot of heels will use the move called the low blow.
Yes.
To win a match.
A claw, if you will, a Von Erich claw. They would try to apply the Von Erich claw to this particular appendage, and instead of having the effect that they suspect, which is pain, this part of Joey Ryan's body has been trained to the point where he can control it, and it makes other wrestlers flip over because it is so powerful and strong. Clearly, this is a ridiculous, ridiculous move. And Mick Foley took said move. He went to apply Mr. Sacco to Joey Ryan, who did a leapfrog, caught him in this appendage, and then Mick Foley took the bump off of this move. And Jim Cornette and many in the wrestling community were very upset with him for doing this. Were they right? Were they wrong? Are they somewhere in the middle? That's the question we will attempt to answer, and we'll start the conversation coming up after the break.
I'm Andrew Kent, and here's 5 reasons to listen to the We Have Till 5 podcast on the Wrasslun Show Network. Number 5, I'm handsome. Not that you would notice. Number 4, I love wrestling. You love wrestling. We both love wrestling, so you'll love this podcast. Number 3, I talk about everything, from worst pay-per-view names to best Chris Jericho feuds. Number 2, lists are pretty fun. And number 1, everyone's got their favorites. Where does mine line up with yours? Find out every Friday on the Wrasslun Show Network.
Okay, Matt. So Foley took, let's just call it Joey Ryan's finisher. Just now that we've explained it clearly, Joey Ryan's finisher. Was it the right thing to do, yes or no? And before we try to answer that, let's first talk about the old saying, funny doesn't equal money. It's an old saying that goes back to, I'm not sure how long ago, but I'm willing to say decades.
Probably when Vince McMahon invented wrestling.
Well, I don't know so much about that. I mean, because there have always been kind of silly, over-the-top gimmicks, but they were still always presented in a serious tone. The best example I could think of, and one of the earliest, is Gorgeous George. He was a guy who came to the ring, permed hair, throwing bobby pins into the audience with a butler, telling the referees to get his filthy hands off of him. Very flamboyant, very over the top. But he was still regarded as a serious wrestler. Compare that to someone like, say, James Ellsworth, who is a very over-the-top character, but is not really considered much of a threat. He's a comedy character purely for the point of comedy. So there is a mentality there, and a good point could be made for it, that comedy does not draw in professional wrestling. Now, that's the question. Before we can establish whether or not Mick Foley was right or wrong to do what he did in Dublin, we need to first of all analyze, can funny equal money? So can comedy be profitable, Matt? What are your initial thoughts on it?
Well, if Gorgeous George is one example, I think Goldust himself can be another example. When he debuted, it was more cringy, awkward kind of, but as he evolved, it became more comedic. I would say, I mean, it's not like he was trying to go out and tell jokes. It was just his actions were funny, but yes, he was still taken seriously. It wasn't like you were like, oh, this guy's a joke and he's going to get beat up. It was just kind of his mannerisms are funny. Well,
let's talk about Goldust for a second, because he could be used as an example of why funny doesn't equal money. Here we had a guy who debuted in 1995 in a over-the-top, flamboyant, homoerotic character that was taken very seriously. His antics weren't looked at as comedy. They were looked at as mind games.
Right. And he's trying to deceive the opponent and get in their head.
And he did end up capturing the Intercontinental Championship
a number of times.
Top player for the company. As the years went by, his character began to change, and they did the Tourette syndrome gimmick, or they had him teaming up with Booker T.
Booker T, yes.
And although those runs with the company were quite memorable, certainly there were those out there, rightfully, who would say he wasn't at the height that he was back in 1995. Speaking of Booker T, let's talk about him for a minute. Because when he first came to the WWE, even though he was the WCW champion, he was treated like a bit of a comedy act.
Now, but did that have was that more of Vince McMahon saying all of WCW was a joke?
Sure, 100%.
Right.
But the question was he able to get over? And I think I could say that the only time in which Booker T started to get over was when he took a serious tone and he feuded with Triple H. Or when he started teaming up with Goldust and played the straight man. At that point, people started taking him more seriously.
Which is crazy to think, because he was a bad ass in WCW. If you've ever seen his promo work, he wasn't... I don't want to say like he was The Rock's version of WCW, because he wasn't. The Rock's another guy who used humor to get over. We'll get to that in just a second. But Booker T was, I would compare him more to like Triple H. Was, you're not gonna mess with me. Like I know what I can do in the ring, and I'm coming for you. That was, I'm coming for you, Hogan. That was Booker T's shtick in WCW. But as soon as the alliance and the invasion happened, I thought he was a joke when he first came over. I really did. And he did grow into being one of my favorite wrestlers of all time when he started when he started to pair up with Goldust, because I was like, okay, now he can start to beat up other people. He's not just, getting run through a grocery store by Stone Cold Steve Austin and all those, I don't know, even in his feuds with The Rock, he just came off as this guy who couldn't cut it.
So we have some examples of when funny didn't equal money, but are there times when funny did equal money? We'll talk about that on the other side of that coin after the break.
Some people listen to their podcast in the car. Me, I record mine in the car. So join me, Jeff DeHaan, for the go-home spot. It's where I'll talk everything from NXT, Raw, SmackDown, or whatever other wrestling-related stuff swims through my head. Join me for the go-home spots, only on the Wrasslun Show Network.
All right, Matt. So we've talked about guys who went from serious to funny or went from funny to serious. But are there guys who have been able to make money and draw as a comedy gimmick? Now, as you said before, The Rock is a guy who certainly was able to use humor to get himself over. And similarly to the question of the day regarding Joey Ryan, the People's Elbow is kind of one of the most ridiculous moves ever created. And yet, he is one of the biggest stars in professional wrestling history. Now, there will be those who would say, well, sure, that move might be a little bit ridiculous, but The Rock himself is a very serious character. Sure, okay, I can understand that argument. Now, can we then discredit wrestlers like Kurt Angle or Steve Austin, who have had some comedy elements to their character, who have been at times highly entertaining because they were funny guys and could throw a bit of comedy in there? At the end of the day, though, because they're serious characters, do they count?
That's hard because I think Kurt Angle might be one of the better examples of that, because he took the idea of him being the first Olympic champion in WWE history to another level. He didn't get really hardcore until at least a year and a bit into his run, but he was still given the WWE Championship when he was still being that funny guy.
Yeah, 100%.
I think his first WWF title run was one, he beat The Rock at, I believe, No Mercy, and he was crying at the end of it. And instead of tears of joy, it was, oh, look, he's a baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he held that title right up until No Way Out. And honestly, going back to that, I think Angle probably could have feuded with Austin in the main event and had The Rock go. I mean, obviously, with it being the biggest WrestleMania of all time, you're not going to change it.
Right.
But it was foreseeable.
Sure.
Maybe you could foresee it being a triple threat between him, Rock, Angle, and Austin. It wasn't out of the question for Angle to be that guy that everyone said he's a whiner, he's a baby. We're kind of laughing at him, but yet he's still getting it done. So I think that's a very good case of laughing at a guy. He's still making money because you want to see him get beat.
Sure.
Or maybe there were people that were cheering for him saying, hey, he is an Olympic champion. Let's get behind this guy.
Now, let's talk about what I think is the most borderline character to ever grace the main event. And that's Mick Foley. Mankind himself,
okay,
despite being a serious character at times, even when he was on top, I think he was seen as a cuddly kind of underdog. Now, does that equate to comedy? Not necessarily, but he was a funny guy, and he oftentimes used a lot of humor and made audiences laugh. And he was a draw for the WWE, a major draw. So at that point in time, do we look at it and say, okay, Foley is an example of when funny can equal money? Or does it negate itself when he's working against a guy like The Rock, when he's working against a guy like Steve Austin, when he's working against serious competitors? Does it negate it? I don't know.
think so. I don't think so, because if there's a heel that's really vicious and that has that mean streak in them, you want to cheer for the guy that's not the jerk, right? And if that guy happens to make you laugh, you're gonna gravitate more towards that than the guy that's just simply being that jerk, I would think, right? And it's so funny how Foley's gimmick as Mankind really mimics Goldust. When Mankind debuted, he was, those feuds with The Undertaker, you're going, who's the more demonic character here? A excuse me, a guy that works at a graveyard or a guy that wears a Hannibal looking mask and pulls out his hair?
It's pretty crazy to think about the evolution of that particular character.
Yeah.
And it's even more peculiar to think about where he ended up in terms of, his drawing ability. And although the Hannibal mask and the serious character of Mankind was a draw, I'd say he was a larger draw as the fan-friendly, nice guy and somewhat funny character that Mick Foley was.
Well, the biggest evidence of that is that the Monday Night War tilted in WWE's favor when Mick Foley won his first championship.
100%. And I would even go back and say that another factor that we could count towards the scale of comedy can draw, This Is Your Life.
Oh, 100%.
It was a comedy sketch, and it's still the highest rated segment in professional wrestling history.
Well, there you go. 2 segments that have featured a more likable, humorous guy are the 2 of the biggest segments Raw has ever had. So, again, those were serious. Well, This Is Your Life wasn't that serious of a moment.
Not at all.
Him winning the title was more serious, but that was an ultimate feel-good moment.
Sure.
So, yeah, there is, I think when you look at that, there is the idea that humor can sell if you get behind him on the fact that you're not laughing at him, you're laughing with him. And The Rock is a guy that you were always laughing with. And I think that's huge. Chris Jericho's another guy, when he does his babyface stuff, you're laughing with him, he goes at guys pretty hard. He goes at guys almost as well as The Rock goes at guys in a humorous way.
We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the comedy gimmicks that have been on top and how it's worked in other places with comedy guys on top. We're going to talk about that in just a few. Hey, it's Adam Conta.
Hey, I'm Drew Ferris.
We came up with the idea for this show, Ropes to Reels, where we talk about movies that have something to do with wrestling.
Could be anything. Could be the story. Could be the plot. Could be one of the executive producers. It's just got to rope around somehow to professional wrestling.
We're going to review everything from the Scorpion King to Ready to Rumble.
From The Wrestler to Scooby-Doo WrestleMania Mystery.
So grab your popcorn
And put on your elbow pads.
and join us in the theater of the mind every week for Ropes to Reels.
Streaming now on the Wrasslun Show Network.
All right, Matt. So we've talked about gimmicks where the comedy hasn't brought in gains, and we've talked about some gimmicks that we feel are borderline. But you wanted to tackle a different topic of sorts regarding this this category. What is it?
Well, it almost seems like funny doesn't make money because a lot of the times people are given humorous gimmicks almost as a punishment. And I don't remember the entire story, but when Perry Saturn was given the Moppy gimmick, it was as a punishment. I can't remember what it was. Did he break someone's arm or something?
He roughed up an enhancement talent.
Right.
Right.
Was that not one of the most memorable things he had ever done
100%.
in the WWF?
In the WWF, without question.
So that's just, for Perry Saturn's personal point of view, that's him making something work, making it out of nothing. But in the overall picture, it's, well, we're giving these guys funny gimmicks and we don't expect them to work. Al Snow is given a mannequin head, and that's one of everyone's favorite chants.
I'll go one step further and talk about a guy that was started as a serious wrestler, got a comedy gimmick, and it was the best thing that ever happened to him. And that's Santino Marella. Because when Santino was brought in, he was brought in as the Milan Miracle. He was a serious wrestler, and nobody cared whatsoever.
The only reason he got so over is because he jumped out of the crowd and won the Intercontinental, and that's one of those ones where, oh man, that'd be so cool if that was me. And then that died. That died hard.
And then once he started showing a bit more personality and having a bit more fun with it, he became one of the most over characters in the company. Now, the question is, could Santino Marella be a guy that could believably headline a WrestleMania or a pay-per-view? Well, there's some precedent for that. Mind you, this is stretching it a little bit, but I still want to bring it up. At Elimination Chamber, one of the wrestlers I can't even remember the year, to be honest with you. It's going back. I want to say 2000.
This is why pay-per-views have to stop being named after matches.
I want to say 2011, or maybe 2012. Santino Marella was brought in as a replacement for one of the wrestlers, and all night long they had these little vignettes where he was training like Rocky, and he got down to the final two, and a lot of people were behind him. Let's talk about Royal Rumble 2011, where he got thrown through the middle ropes. Alberto Del Rio eliminates everybody, and we all think that he wins. Suddenly, Santino comes out from underneath the ring, and the place went bananas. They were solidly behind Santino Marella as winning the Royal Rumble. So, is it possible that maybe just WWE hasn't given a chance for somebody of that kind of character to make it on top? And the only reason I bring this up is because when we look at guys like a Colt Cabana, who is seen as somewhat of a comedy guy who's made himself a very good living on the indies, or a Grado, or heck, Chikara. This is an entire company that's comedy based. PWG has a little touch of comedy to them as well. A lot of places on the indies are able to take these comedy concepts and make them work as an entire business. So there has to be something there that says, well, this can be a draw when marketed the right way. I want to bring up one more example, and I know I'm getting long-winded with this, but I want to say it before I forget it, because it was something I meant to mention in the last segment. When talking about comedy acts on top, I think that we're missing a glaring one, which is DX. Especially when Shawn Michaels and Triple H had their reunion in 2006. They were one of the top angles on Monday Night Raw, and they were pure comedy. They were out there mixing it up with the Spirit Squad and the McMahons, and it was all about them doing comedy bits. Now, some people will say that they weren't all that funny at all. Regardless, the point
they were
was,
as funny as the PG era would let them be.
They were doing comedy, and they were doing it on top for the most part. So, is that enough precedence to say that this argument from Jim Cornette and the wrestling community is wrong? Well, I don't know. We'll try to figure that out in a few minutes. But what other examples can you think of guys who have taken a comedy gimmick and made it work and made it a draw for them?
Well, I was just going to touch on DX, and I think the difference is those are already two established guys that had been there before. DX was already they were also a funny group back when they had originally started as well. They just had a little more edge to them. They were a little more adult comedy.
Sure.
Right? So that, I think, is the difference. And going back to what you said about, Santino, and can a guy like that get over? Clearly they can get over with the crowd. It's the fact that WWE and Vince McMahon and that creative team have never had a sense of humor that the fans share. So I feel like anything that they find is funny is, again, something that is used more to punish as opposed to trying to get guys over. Or they see it as a joke just to be like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if we did this? Not thinking the crowd is going to get it. They almost do stuff as a swerve, not actually thinking it can get over. Just as let's just throw this in because let's all laugh at this guy or this girl.
It certainly wouldn't be the first time. They've oftentimes created gimmicks or done something on TV just to amuse themselves. So here we are. Is Jim Cornette right? Is the wrestling community right about this? Should Foley have not done it? Or are they maybe taking it too seriously? We'll try to answer that question when we come back.
Hey, it's at Matthew Sucre. I'm here to tell you about the Wrasslun Show podcast. You've
got nothing. However, we have till 5 every Friday in the Wrasslun Show Network. This week we're counting down on...
Do we have a problem?
Yeah, Smarky Smark here is trying to take over this commercial.
Did someone say takeover? Because on the Go Home spot, I cover all the goings-on in NXT, including takeovers, as well as everything else happening in WWE and beyond.
Where did you come from, Jeff?
I just drove in.
Well, take the next exit, would you? This is my commercial.
You mean our commercial?
God, try it again. I don't want this commercial to end up like some of the more regrettable movies I review on Ropes to Reels. I want it to end up like one of the good movies I review on Ropes to Reels.
Nobody asked you, Drew.
Oh, you want to go, Sparky Plug?
When you host the Wrasslun Show, the Go Home Spot, Ropes to Reels, and We Have Till 5 podcasts all on one network, spontaneous host battle royals just kind of happen. The Wrasslun Show Network, where everything is wrestling and wrestling is everything. All right, Matt, so what's your verdict then? Whose side are you on here?
I'm on Foley's side here. Are you not, as a wrestler, supposed to put people over? If that is this guy's gimmick, I don't care who you are. If you think it's dumb, you're not going to get anywhere in the business by continually saying no. And I know Foley isn't this like up and coming guy. I get that. But for him to say, I'm not doing that, that's stupid, you're putting this guy's character down. A character that clearly is over with other people. So are you not trying to give the people that have paid the money the best experience? And if people are expecting to see that, why not give it to them?
Well, I think Foley put it best on his Instagram when he shared a picture. He said, look at all the smiles in the crowd, and that's what we do. Here's the thing. I agree with Jim Cornette and the wrestling community, sort of. And I agree with Mick Foley, sort of. Here's the thing. I believe the old saying. I agree, funny doesn't equal money. I think when it comes to a main event and draws and major angles, it should be you should take a serious approach to it if you want to be taken seriously. WWE wants to be taken seriously. So when they do comedy stuff, especially with main eventers, it doesn't always work, and a lot of times it kind of falls flat. Now, that being said, Mick Foley, to quote him again, has always said that wrestling is kind of like a circus. You know, if you're not interested in the guy getting shot out of a cannon, well, maybe the elephants will entertain you. And if you're not entertained by that, maybe it's the clowns. And everybody has a place on the card. Certainly, those wrestlers who've been able to add comedy elements into their characters and their angles have made it more entertaining. But every place has its place on the card. Now, that being said, although I think funny doesn't equate money in a WWE style program, this was an indie show in Ireland. Nothing against Ireland. I should probably make that clear. But I mean, you know, it's a small crowd. They're going after a niche audience. What's the harm in having a little bit of fun? You know, I'm certainly not one of these, although I do tend to believe a lot of the old school mentality. I am not one of these guys that believes that wrestling has to be the way it was back in the 60s and 70s, and that the idea of kayfabe being dead is killing the business. I don't think that's true at all. And I like the idea of a Chikara being around. I like the idea of having different niche programming, because sometimes I want to see that stuff. And some guys who are good at it are really good at it. And if they can find an audience, heck, it just means more wrestling. And isn't that a good thing? Isn't that what we want as fans? So I say Foley didn't do anything wrong. I'm with him on this one. I do agree with the overall philosophy of Jim Cornette, but I think in this one, I think maybe he should probably have just let it go. I don't think it was that big a deal, to be honest.
He doesn't do that well, though.
He doesn't.
He doesn't let go of a lot of things.
And that's part of what makes him great. And I agree. And I agree with him on a lot of things that he gets upset about. But this is not one of them. I think that he could probably just let it go with this one, knowing the niche, the market, that sort of thing. If this was done on Raw, yes. Absolutely yes.
It would be like, where are they going with this?
Absolutely, 100%. But there is something to be said about the time and the place in which the act happens, not just the act itself. So that's how I feel about it. I think as a general rule, I agree with you, Jim. But in this instance, this particular case, I got to side with Foley on that one. So I don't know if we really answered the question of does funny equal money, but I think we've certainly given our opinions on it. Matt, anything else?
And some examples too that where it does and doesn't work. I just want to give a shout out to Tomer Shalom. A guy that we have seen wrestle quite often in Northland Wrestling, which is the promotion here in North Bay. If you have, when this airs, they would already have done their Rumble in the North.
If you were at the event yesterday, you would have seen.
Hopefully you enjoyed it. But they've got the Miller Memorial Cup 2 coming up in November. But Tomer Shalom has been a staple in Northland Wrestling really since it got started. And he wrestled as JP Goulet from Quebec on Monday Night Raw against Jason Jordan. And you know what was awesome? A lot of the Toronto crowd knew who Tomer was because he does get booked down in Southern Ontario quite a bit. And they started a "Let's go Tomer" chant and started booing Jason Jordan when he was getting his offense in. And it's just very cool to see that even though these are the big time shows, the smaller voices can sometimes still be heard. And it's so awesome to see a guy like that who's, despite his character, he's a pretty nice guy, to get a chance to go, get his 2 minutes of fame in on Monday Night Raw. And, hopefully maybe show that he could take a good bump here and there, and, maybe someone from the training center gives him a call. So good job, Tomer. Congrats, buddy. It was awesome to see you. Keep going for it.
Yeah, he looked great on Monday for sure. So go back and watch that if you haven't had a chance, and go back and listen to some of the episodes over the past year. That's your homework assignment for this week. I've really enjoyed the last year with you, Matt. Thank you so much. Here's to many more.
Let's do it, buddy.
Until then, until next year, until our next anniversary episode, I'm at Adam Kota. That's at Matthew Sukram. It's been a year. If you don't know by now, I'm going to tell you again. Listen, share, subscribe, repeat.
Of the Wrasslun Show Network, where everything is wrestling.